This video covers how to drive on motorways. From the 4th of June 2018, learner drivers will be allowed on motorways provided they're in a dual-controlled car and accompanied by an approved driving instructor. And here is the list of the topics I'm going to cover in this video. It's important to prepare before you drive on a motorway, particularly the first time. You should read and understand the highway code section relating to motorway driving. Know what motorway signs and motorway lights mean before you get on the motorway. You won't be able to look them up while you're on the road. Know and understand the motorway breakdown procedure. Know where your hazard lights are and how to turn them on if you need them in a hurry. To minimise the risk of breakdown, check the condition of your vehicle before you set off for the motorway. So check your own condition as well. If you feel tired, unwell or distracted, it's probably best not to go on the motorway, or indeed to drive at all. Plan your route and know how long you're expecting it to take and which exit number you're looking for when you leave, and try and choose a quiet time of day for the first time you go on a motorway. And finally, pack your just-in-case items, your mobile phone, a drink and a snack, and your breakdown recovery details just in case. So let's look at how we join the motorway from slip roads. In this first example, we're joining the M3 and merging in with 3 lanes of existing traffic. Motorways generally have longer slip roads than dual carriageways, giving you plenty of time to get up to speed. Aim for 50 to 60 mile an hour and then match the speed of the traffic on the inside lane. Once you're up to speed, indicate right to attract attention and use your right-hand door mirror to find a safe gap to merge into. Steer gently onto the carriageway and cancel your indicator. We were lucky to have a particularly big gap this time, but if you get your speed right coming down the slip road, it should feel just as calm even when the road is busier. If you match your speed to the vehicles already on the road, then relative to you, they're not moving, so it's easy to find your gap. I've matched the speed of the blue van. Now I indicate right to attract attention and look in my right-hand door mirror. Notice the lorry that I've circled in black and notice my speed is 62 miles an hour as I've highlighted in yellow. Lorries are limited to 60 miles an hour on a motorway, so because I'm going faster than the lorry, the gap between the blue van and the lorry should get bigger, making it safe for me to join. So now I've found my safe gap, I'll maintain a steady speed and continue to the end of the slip road. I'm not going to stare in my mirror, I need to look ahead to steer a straight path and stay in my lane. But I will glance in my mirror again to make sure that the lorry hasn't got bigger, which would indicate he's gaining on me, making the gap smaller. But if the lorry's the same size next time I look or smaller, then I know the gap is safe. The other things I need to check before I commit to join are that no one's moving from lane 2 or lane 3 into lane 1 into the gap I'm planning to join into, which I can check in the right-hand door mirror, and that no one's right beside me, which I check by a quick glance out of the driver's door window. So let's restart the video and see how this works. Glance back in the mirror, you can see the lorry's getting smaller and smaller and further away, and nobody's moving into lane 1. So a quick glance to my shoulder, nobody there, and I run to the end of the slip road and merge. Here's another example. This time I'm on a much shorter slip road because I'm coming out from Motorway Services. This means I haven't been able to build up as much speed as I would like, and in fact I'm only doing 37 mile an hour as highlighted in yellow on the bottom of the screen. The traffic on the motorway is travelling faster, around 60 mile an hour. So the silver car I can see in my mirror will overtake me and be in front of me by the time I reach the end of the slip road. So I need to be looking for a gap behind this silver car so that I'm trying to join just behind the silver car. So let's restart the video and see how we do it. I've paused the video again here to point out that the silver car is in my blind spot. He's no longer visible in my mirror, but he's also not visible looking ahead. If this was the first time I'd looked in my mirror on the slip road, I'd think there's a safe gap and I wouldn't realise the silver car was beside me, which is why the quick check out of the driver's door window into that blind spot is so vital before you join a motorway. Let's restart the video. Silver car's now visible ahead of me, there's a large gap in lane 1 behind it and nobody is changing lanes. So I continue increasing speed to the end of the slip lane and merge into lane 1. That was a slightly trickier one, but still nice and calm. Once I'd spotted my gap behind the silver car, I continued to accelerate down the slip road, trying to meet the gap. And as I joined, I was up to 53 mile an hour. Although I wasn't watching my speedo, I was watching the traffic and adjusting my speed to meet it, because it's the relative speed that's important, not the actual speed. Let's look at one last example of joining from a slip road. Again, I'm coming from a Motorway Services, which means I don't have much opportunity to build up speed, particularly with this long bend here. I'm only doing around 30 mile an hour at this point. If I was doing the same speed as the car in lane 1, then it would be safe to merge into the gap in front of him. But he's clearly going faster than me, he's gaining on me, so this gap is going to disappear. I need to look for a gap further back in lane 1, but at the moment I can't see further back. So I continue to accelerate in the slip lane, getting nearer to the speed of the vehicles in lane 1 and looking for another gap in lane 1 that I can safely merge into. Let's restart the video. As the first vehicle catches me up, I can see another vehicle in lane 1 and I'm planning to go behind that. So I'm matching my speed to meet that gap, but just as I do that, the blue car pulls out to lane 2. That's useful and gives me a bigger gap to aim for, but as you can see, I would have merged behind him anyway, because I'd got my speed just right. So that's several different examples of merging onto a motorway from a slip road. Hopefully you can see that managing your speed is the key to doing this safely. At some junctions, the slip lane turns into a dedicated lane for joining. This means you don't have to merge into the traffic already on the motorway and is much simpler and safer. Let's take a look at a couple of examples. The blue sign with the arrows is the key. It shows that if we stay in the lane we're in, we form a new lane, adding to 3 lanes already on the motorway. But if we had picked the lane which the white van is in, then we wouldn't get our own lane and we'd have to merge into the existing traffic on the motorway. Restart the video and see how this plays out. Notice that the white van and the other vehicles ahead of it in the same lane have to find a safe gap to merge into the traffic already on the motorway. Notice also they're having to cross a dotted white line as they join, indicating that they don't have priority. Notice again the blue sign with the white arrows. It shows 3 lanes of traffic already on the motorway and the lane we're in joining to form a new lane, not crossing a dotted line and not having to merge in with the existing traffic. Notice there are no dotted lines across our path, indicating that we don't need to yield priority to the traffic already on the carriageway, and now we've just become an extra lane of the motorway. Now let's look at another much busier example as we join the M25 from the M3. Again, the blue sign with the white arrows is the key to what's going on here. This time, none of the traffic on the slip road has to merge in with existing traffic on the motorway. What happens is first, the right-hand lane of the slip road creates a new lane on the motorway, and then the left-hand lane of the slip road merges into that. So effectively, the traffic on the slip road just merges with itself to create a new lane on the motorway, and it doesn't affect the traffic already on the motorway. So let's see it in action. First, the right-hand lane of the slip road forms a new lane on the motorway, adding to the 3 lanes which were already there before this junction. And then the left-hand lane of the slip road merges into that new lane, which is formed by the traffic that's just come from the right-hand lane of the slip road. When there are dedicated lanes on a slip road, choosing the right lane can give you a much safer and easier path onto the motorway. It's vital that you understand these lane signs before you get on the motorway, so study the highway code and look for examples on the internet before you go on the motorway. Because you need to know whether you've got to find a safe gap to merge into or whether the lane that you're in creates that safe opportunity for you anyway. Now we've safely joined the motorway, let's look at how we drive safely on it. We need to make good progress. If we drive too slowly or slow suddenly, it will catch out people behind us. Drive on the left, so stay left unless you're overtaking or unless road markings tell you need another lane. As the vehicle in front passes a fixed point like this bridge, say only a fool breaks the 2-second rule. If you reach the same point before you can finish saying it, then you're too close to the vehicle in front. Plan ahead. Lorries are limited to 60 miles an hour, so we're going to need to overtake it. Plan early. Check your mirrors. It's not currently safe to change lanes, but it will be behind this red car, provided this white van doesn't move across into lane number 2. Now the red car's passed, check again. There's the white van, so it is safe. Change lanes smoothly with gentle steering. There's no rush. Maintain speed as you change lanes. Now accelerate past the lorry. Don't cut back in. You need to be well ahead of the vehicle you've just overtaken before you look for a safe opportunity to return back to the left lane. Make sure you can see both headlights on both your main mirror and your left mirror before you consider returning to the left lane, and maintain speed while you change lanes. You don't want to overtake somebody and then slow down in front of them. Hopefully, you never will be involved in a breakdown on a motorway, but it's important to know the procedure if it should happen. The lane to the left of the solid white line is known as the hard shoulder, such as breaking down, getting a puncture, or having a tyre blowout. Here we see a lorry which has broken down and pulled onto the hard shoulder. Notice how it's pulled as far to the left as possible. If you stop on the hard shoulder, you want as much space as possible between your stationary vehicle and the traffic travelling at 60 to 70 miles an hour in lane 1. If you do break down on the motorway, don't try and fix the vehicle yourself. Call for assistance. The people coming to help you will need to know where you are. These marker posts appear approximately every 1/10 of a mile along the edge of the hard shoulder. Each post has a unique number on it to identify its location. Make a note of the number on the post nearest to your broken down vehicle. Each post also has a picture of a phone and an arrow telling you which way the nearest phone is, so you know which way to walk. Wherever possible, walk on the grass verge rather than on the hard shoulder. Remember, you've got traffic rushing past you at 60 to 70 miles an hour, and the wind from these vehicles can knock you off your feet quite easily. The emergency phones have orange panels on them to make them highly visible, and they're located approximately every mile along the hard shoulder. When using an emergency phone, stand on the far side of the barrier away from the hard shoulder. You never know when another vehicle is going to want to pull onto the hard shoulder. If you have an emergency when driving and need to use the hard shoulder, first put your hazard lights on. This warns traffic behind you that you may be slowing down and using the hard shoulder. Then gently steer yourself into the hard shoulder lane, just like any other lane change. Once you're on the hard shoulder, lose speed. Ideally, try not to slow down on the main carriageway before you're on the hard shoulder, as it can catch out people behind you. So use the hard shoulder as a deceleration lane and try to stop next to or very close to an emergency phone so you don't have to walk too far on the hard shoulder. If you can't stop your vehicle near an emergency phone, then use the nearest marker post to identify which way you need to walk to the nearest phone. In this clip, notice how close the lorry is to the solid white line. He's right in the edge of his lane and almost drifting onto the hard shoulder. Lorries often do drift accidentally onto the hard shoulder before pulling back onto the main carriageway. These people here are not safe at all. This is exactly the wrong way to use the hard shoulder. If a lorry drifts onto the hard shoulder and hits their vehicle at 60 miles an hour, there won't be a lot left of it, or them. If you do stop on the hard shoulder, first get everybody out of the vehicle. Ideally from the passenger side because of all the traffic rushing past on the driver's side. Get everybody completely off the tarmac and onto the grass verge at the side. If anything does hit your stationary vehicle, the debris will be thrown forwards, so make sure you're not standing in that area. Do not attempt to repair the vehicle yourself. Use the nearest emergency phone to call for assistance. If you have to walk to the phone, stay off the carriageway. If there is a barrier, stay on the far side of the barrier away from the carriageway. The hard shoulder of a motorway is not a safe or comfortable place to be. So always check your car's tyres and fluid levels before starting a motorway journey to minimise the risk of breaking down and needing to use the hard shoulder. If the recovery services manage to repair your vehicle and you're able to restart your journey, then use the hard shoulder like a slip lane to build up speed before trying to merge in with the traffic on lane 1 of the motorway. You'll be merging in with traffic travelling at 60 to 70 miles an hour, so build up speed first and find a safe gap. Don't just pull out at 10 mile an hour in front of a lorry that's doing 60. But hopefully you'll never need to use a hard shoulder. Not all motorways have a hard shoulder. Take a look at this 4-lane section of the M3 motorway in Hampshire. There's no space at all on the left-hand side to pull over if we have a problem. The barrier's right beside us. So what we have on these motorways is Emergency Refuge Areas, also known as SOS laybys. And these are located approximately every 1.5 miles along the carriageway. You'll see information signs like this telling you how far it is to the next emergency refuge area or lay-by. And when you get to one, you'll see the solid line becomes a broken line, indicating that you can pull across. The tarmac is a different colour to make it stand out. And there's a space marked on the floor next to the emergency phone, which is where you're supposed to stop your car. These laybys are only for emergency use, such as a breakdown or being ill. Never use them for a convenience stop to get something out of the boot or to make a phone call, for example. Emergency use only. Notice how short the lay-by is and think about how much you'd need to slow down before you pulled into one if you needed one in an emergency. Look at another example and think about the practicalities of using these emergency refuge areas or SOS laybys. So here we see a lay-by in use, which gives us a better idea of the size of these refuge areas. We would have to slow down before entering this area because it's quite small. So the first thing you do when you know you've got a problem is put your hazard lights on. This alerts drivers behind you that you have a problem and that you could be slowing or stopping. If the refuge is already in use, like this one, you'd have to slow even more because you've got to stop sooner. If there was a lorry already in the refuge, you probably wouldn't be able to fit in. You'd have to skip this one and go to the next one in 1.5 miles. Once you've entered the lay-by, get as far over to the left as possible and stop at the position marked on the ground. Get everybody out of the car and to the far side of the barrier away from the traffic. Follow the instructions on the sign in the refuge area and use the emergency phone to contact the control centre. Follow the instructions of the people in the control centre. Under no circumstances must you try to leave one of these refuge areas without contacting the control centre. They need to stop traffic in lane 1 to create a safe gap for you to pull out into. There's no space in the lay-by for you to build up speed before pulling out into lane 1. And the traffic in lane 1 is likely to be travelling at 60 to 70 miles an hour, so it wouldn't be safe to pull out in front of them without that traffic being stopped in that lane. If you're travelling along the motorway and you see a red X over lane number 1, it means that lane is closed. There could well be a slow-moving vehicle ahead of you pulling out of one of these lay-bys. So whenever you see a red X over a lane, you need to get out of that lane as soon as it's safe because there will be a hazard ahead and that lane is closed. If you break down between refuge areas and can't make it to the next one, the advice is to put your hazard lights on, get as far over to the left as possible, stay in the car with your seat belts on, and phone 999. Let's hope you never find yourself in that situation. Now let's look at motorway junctions. Junctions will be clearly signposted, normally 1.5 miles in advance, like this sign on the left here. There are no road markings or road signs telling us that any lanes go to particular places, so all 3 lanes will allow us to continue on the motorway, which is what we want to do. So we stay in the left lane unless we're overtaking. As we get close to the junction, we get the countdown marker boards, like this one here. You'll get 3 stripes at 300 yards from the junction, 2 stripes at 200 yards from the junction, and 1 stripe when you're just 100 yards away. If you're not sure what a yard is, it's almost exactly the same as a metre. Because we're not leaving at this exit, all we need to do is keep an eye on lane 2 and make sure that no one from lane 2 is going to cut across at the last minute in order to leave. And they're not. The next junction is slightly different. Take a look at the sign over lane 1. Notice the arrow pointing straight down towards lane 1. The highway code says a downward pointing arrow means get in lane. What this sign is telling us is that lane 1 is going to leave at the next exit and go to the A322. The other 3 lanes, lane 2, lane 3 and lane 4, are all going to continue on the motorway. Lane 1 is what we call a drop lane because it drops off the motorway at the junction. So to continue on the motorway, I don't want to be in lane 1 because lane 1 is going to leave. I happen to already be in lane 2 because I've just overtaken someone, and I now won't return to lane 1 because I know I'm going to have to get out of it shortly. We're 1 mile away from the exit according to this sign, and at 60 miles an hour, it will take me a minute to cover a mile. So if I was in lane 1, I know that I've got a minute to find a safe gap to move across to lane 2, so there's no rush. Notice the line separating lane 1 and lane 2, which I've highlighted in yellow. At this 1 mile marker board, this line changes to make it stand out more, to highlight the fact that lane 1 is going somewhere different from lanes 2, 3 and 4. So as the video restarts, keep an eye on that line between lane 1 and 2. Notice how it stands out much more and it's different from the lines between the other lanes. If you missed the sign over the lane for some reason, this different white line should highlight to you the fact that lane 1 is going somewhere else and it's a drop lane. As we pass this half-mile marker, you'll see the line changes again, the line between lane 1 and lane 2, making it stand out even more now. And as we reach the junction, we get a final reminder with this overhead gantry sign. Notice the split in the sign. Lanes 2, 3 and 4 have a single sign bridging all 3 lanes, saying that all 3 lanes are going to the same place with the downward pointing arrows. The sign is split. There's a different sign over lane 1 with a different set of destinations and the A322. Lane 1 only goes to the A322 with no option to continue on the M3. Lanes 2, 3 and 4 only continue on the M3 with no option to leave on the A322. So if a lane drops and you lose a lane at one side of the junction, it's reasonable to expect that you'll gain a lane on the other side of the junction. Currently we have 3 lanes, whereas before the junction we had 4 lanes. And as we approach the point where the slip road is going to join us, we get this sign on the left explaining what's going to happen. This sign shows 3 arrows going straight ahead, which represents the 3 lanes on the motorway continuing. It also shows 2 arrows coming in at an angle from the left, which represents 2 lanes on the slip road. The leftmost arrow represents the left lane on the slip road, and this bends around and creates a new lane on my left. This is the lane we're gaining. The right-hand lane of the slip lane, however, crosses the dotted line and merges in with the lane I'm currently in. So I know I need to watch out for traffic trying to merge into my lane, and I need to create a gap for them if possible. Looking in the far left lane in the distance, I can see 2 lorries very close together. I'm travelling faster than them, so I'm going to catch them up very shortly. I suspect that the second lorry is going to try and overtake the first because he's so close, and I don't want to be beside him if he changes lanes. That's why I've moved out to lane number 3. And there he goes, just as I expected. The clue for me there was the fact that the second lorry was so close to the first, as if he was getting ready to overtake it. Now let's look at a more complex junction. This one is where the M3 meets the M25. The M25 goes in 2 different directions, so the junction has to offer us the choice of either of those directions. This time, look at the vertical dotted lines separating the sign. Both lane 1 and lane 2 are drop lanes going off to the M25 towards Heathrow. So only lane 3 and lane 4 continue as the M3. Lane 3 also offers the option of joining the M25 towards Gatwick. If I stay in lane 1 or lane 2, then I'll leave the M3, and I don't want to do that, so I need to move across to lane 3 when it's safe to do so. Now I'm nearer the junction and we get the gantry signs across the lanes. This presents the same information but in a clearer way. There's a sign bridging lane 1 and lane 2, saying that those two lanes go to the M25 towards Heathrow only. There's a sign bridging lanes 3 and lane 4, saying that both those lanes continue on the M3 towards London. And there's an additional sign over lane 3 only, saying that that lane also offers the choice to go towards Gatwick on the M25. So lane 1 only goes towards M25 Heathrow. Lane 2 only goes M25 towards Heathrow as well. Lane 3 allows me either to follow the M3 to London or follow the M25 towards Gatwick. Lane 4 only allows me to follow the M3 towards London. I want to follow the M3 towards London, so I can choose lane 3 or lane 4. I'm going to choose lane 3 because effectively that's the left lane on the motorway after lanes 1 and 2 drop and we drive on the left. Notice how the white line between lane 2 and lane 3 is different from the other white lines, indicating again that lanes 1 and 2 are going to drop and go somewhere different from lanes 3 and lane 4. Effectively, we've got two separate roads running here. And after we pass that half-mile marker, that line changes again to make it stand out even more. And as we get to the junction, we get additional signs. The sign on the left with the arrows shows what's about to happen. First, lane 1 and lane 2 will both drop to the left. As you work your way up the sign, lane 3 then splits, creating a new lane for traffic heading towards Gatwick on the M25. So we end up with 5 lanes in the junction and only 2 lanes continuing on the M3 towards London. And the gantry sign over the road is just a repeat of the previous gantry sign we saw. So now we've seen how to identify junctions and how to choose our lane on the approach to a junction. Let's look at how to use a junction to leave the motorway. I want to leave at the next exit, and this sign shows me it's in half a mile's time. Travelling at 60 miles an hour means I cover a mile in a minute, so half a mile will take me about 30 seconds. And I'm going to maintain a steady speed until I'm on the slip road, unless people ahead of me slow. I'm still on the motorway. I need to maintain progress, not slow down and cause issues for people behind me. Here's my countdown markers, 300 yards. I'd put my left indicator on now to let people know I'm leaving. Maintain my speed as I pass the 200 and the 100. Check my mirrors, make sure no one's going to cut across in front of me at the last minute, and then steer gently onto the slip road. I know I want to turn right at the roundabout at the end of the slip road, so I've aimed for the right-hand lane on the slip road on this occasion. Now I need to bring my speed down for the roundabout at the end. Check your speedo. You won't feel the speed you're actually doing. You'll feel like you're only doing 20 mile an hour, but your speedo will tell you you're doing 50. Trust your speedo, it'll be right. Your speed awareness will be wrong, and you need to be prepared to stop at the end of the slip road, as in this case I've got a red light. You don't always get a nice long straight slip road when you're leaving. Sometimes you get sharp bends quite soon on the slip road. If you've been travelling at a steady 70 mile an hour for a couple of hours and then turn onto a slip road like this, you've really got to work at your speed awareness, getting your speed down for these bends. Check that speedo and trust it. Defensive driving is an important skill when you're on the motorway. All the vehicles are travelling at high speed, so situations can develop very quickly. Yet strangely, drivers feel like things are happening in slow motion. Because everyone's travelling at near enough the same speed, the relative speeds are very low. So when someone overtakes you, the speed difference is probably only about 10 mile an hour, and this is what causes the confusion with the speed perception. Never forget though that you're eating up the road and running out of space very quickly. At 70 miles an hour, you're travelling 103 feet a second or 31.3 metres every second. To put that into context, you're travelling the length of a football pitch in 3 seconds. So you need to be looking well ahead, planning for what you're about to encounter. You also need to be keeping up to date with regular mirror checks so you know where gaps are and where your escape route is if anything should develop. If you see traffic ahead of you slowing suddenly, then put your hazard lights on to warn people behind you. As well as constant planning, the other main thing you need to use for defensive driving is leaving plenty of space around you. Leave space in front of you by following the 2-second rule to leave a good separation to the vehicle in front. Leave space around you by not putting yourself beside someone when you think they might be about to change lanes. As you approach a junction, expect people to change lanes. Also, expect people to make mistakes and leave room for them to make the mistake. By that, I mean don't put yourself beside them if they might change their mind. The more complex the junction is, the more you can expect people to make mistakes. At this next junction, lane 1 is a drop lane, only going to the M40 heading west. Will someone be in that lane and realise at the last minute that they actually need to stay on the M25? Will someone get in that lane because it says M40 and then realise that they need the M40 heading east, which is in lane 2, rather than the M40 heading west, which is in lane 1? Or will someone leave it to the last minute to lunge across from lane 2 or 3 or 4 to leave the motorway? I'm expecting all of those things could possibly happen here, and I'm leaving space for people to make those mistakes. So let's see what happens. Watch the silver car ahead of me in lane 2. He seems a bit unsure. He seems to be slowing down. He's chosen the drop lane. It's important I don't put myself alongside him in case he changes his mind and pulls back like he's done there at the last minute crossing that solid white line. I could easily have accelerated up alongside him, but I allowed him room to make the mistake. Let's see where he actually goes. Did he want to stay on the M25 or did he just pick the wrong M40 junction? Here, the car in lane 2 has chosen the wrong lane and actually wants lane 3, but so does the car in lane 1 who's now moving into lane 2. Even though the guy who's now in lane 3 made a mistake himself, he doesn't allow room for the guy in lane 2 who's made the same mistake, and he almost runs out of road at the last minute here. That's not what I call defensive driving. The more complicated the junction is, the more likely it is people will make mistakes. Expect the mistake to happen and leave room for them to make the mistake. This is a complex junction where the M25 meets the M4. There are currently 4 lanes on the motorway, but lane 1 is a drop lane. You can see the different white line between lane 1 and lane 2. So anybody in lane 1 will be leaving the M25 and heading on to the M4. But have they noticed the signs, or have they made a mistake and they're going to change lane at the last minute? Leave them room to do it. To the left of the drop lane in lane 1, there are 2 new lanes being formed by a slip road joining. So that gives us a 6-lane motorway, which is quite complex by anyone's standard, so expect some mistakes. So let's number the lanes 1 to 6 from the left-hand side. So lane 1 and 2 are currently the slip road that's about to join. Lane 3 is the drop lane that's about to leave the M25. Lane 4, 5 and 6 are going to continue as the M25. I'm in what I've just called lane 4, which will be the left-hand lane of the M25 when the other 3 lanes drop. Chances are that people that are on the slip road joining want to join the M25, not the M4. So they're going to have to make their way from lane 1 and lane 2 all the way across to lane number 4 to get onto the M25. Chances are that some people in lane 4, 5 or 6 haven't noticed it's a drop lane and will move across at the last minute into lane 3, lane 2 or lane 1. I'm expecting a lot of lane changing to happen in a short space of road here. Lane changing from both sides, so I'm leaving plenty of space around me, and let's see what develops. And here's another example of confusion. Watch the red car currently in lane 3. See how he's going slower than the cars around him, which is a clear sign of confusion. So I'm going to keep my eye on him because I've got him down as a driver who's likely to make mistakes. Oops, he's slowing again. He's definitely confused. I'm going to keep my eye on him as I go past, checking the rear view mirror, and he's changing lanes again. Expect confusion at junctions, keep alert, leave space for people to make mistakes. And finally, just a little bit about motorway services. If you're driving for more than an hour or an hour and a half on a motorway, plan to take a break, and motorway services are good places to do that. But beware, they often have short slip roads and sharp bends. Your speed perception is going to be wrong. You're going to have a very sudden change of speed when you come off the motorway into a motorway services. You're going to find it difficult to judge your speed, so check your speedo. You may even, as in this case, have to come to a stop. If you do stop or slow significantly, put your hazard lights on to warn anyone coming zooming up the slip road behind you. Now, after an hour or so of high-speed driving where your focus has been further ahead, you've suddenly got a completely different level of hazard to deal with. And you're going to have to start scanning around the car a lot more as you come into a car park where you're going to have potentially children, pedestrians, people reversing. It's a real shock to the system to come from a 70-mile-an-hour motorway to a 10-mile-an-hour car park in just a couple of seconds. So just be aware and be ready for it. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you've got this far, well done, because it's a long video and there's a lot in it. I suggest you probably go back and revisit some sections and watch them again. I'd really appreciate it if you could like the video on YouTube and also subscribe to my channel so you find out about the next videos that I release. If you've got any comments on the video or any questions about anything in the video or anything else to do with motorway driving, please put them in the comment section and I'll do my best to get around to answering them. Thanks again for watching, have a great day and drive safe.